Welcome, and thank you for joining the NCF Virtual Spring Program featuring General Robert Spalding. I am Laura Nelson, the President and CEO of the Foundation. We've made a few changes since our winter membership program in January. You may have heard or seen in our e-newsletter or our website that we've modified our name to the National Cryptologic Foundation. While we were originally incorporated to support activities, displays, and artifact acquisition for the National Cryptologic Museum, over the years, our mission has broadened to include a robust education program and a capital campaign to build a cyber center for education and innovation. We believe our new name helps to reflect the broader mission. We will continue to educate the public and inspire our nation's students to explore cryptology and STEM fields of study, stimulate robust dialogue and engagement with the American public on cyber policy, technology, and privacy, and commemorate all those who serve in silence in the cryptologic mission with valor and distinction. Our support of the National Cryptologic Museum remains a vital part of our mission, especially as we expand our partnership with the National Security Agency. The NCF is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we thank our members who have joined us today and continue to support us and provide programs like today. I'll provide more information about Foundation membership following today's speaker. Before we begin our program, I want to share some sad news. Charlie Gandy, a legend in our community, passed away yesterday at home. As you may recall, Charlie was a speaker at our GMM in 2019 for a program featuring Eric Hazeltine's book, The Spy in Moscow Station. He was a trailblazer in the cryptologic mission and will certainly be missed. Today, our program, What's to Follow in 2021, From Coronavirus to Taiwan, the New Chinese Communist Party, will focus on General Spalding's new and very timely book, Stealth War, How China Took Over While America's Elite Slept, an executive summary of his almost decade-long work countering Chinese Communist Party influence. General Robert Spalding is an innovator and accomplished national security policy strategist who has written extensively on national security matters. He has served in senior positions of strategy and diplomacy within the Defense and State Department for more than 26 years. Retiring as a brigadier general. He previously served as chief architect of the national security strategy and the senior director for strategy for the previous administration. Robert's innovation while serving at the White House led to a reset in national security and public policy regarding telecommunications in the US and globally. He is currently the CEO of Semper, a standalone 5G service and software platform designed to power the automated world. As a reminder, if you have any questions, please add them to the Q&A. Welcome, General Spalding.
Thank you. It's great to be here. It's, one of the things that as I've looked at what I've worked on over the last almost 10 years, I really believe that encryption is a key component of a democracy in the 21st century. And so this is a great group to be talking to, and I look forward to the questions and dialogue. I spent 26 years in the Air Force, almost 27 years. Most of my time was as a B-2 pilot, but there was a certain aspect of my career towards the tail end that was really focused on the US-China relationship. I spent 2 years in China as a young major during the, actually in the very beginnings of the second Iraq War. Actually, I got to Defense Language Institute in April of 2001 before 9/11. Of course, when 9/11 happened, I was in the gym just prior to going to my Chinese class. All of my colleagues went to the Middle East, and I ended up going to China is the kind of moral of that story. But the part that really I think is interesting is that when I left in 2004, Shanghai, where I lived, and I studied at Tongji University in Shanghai, I told my wife, we're coming back because this place is growing like gangbusters. All the Fortune 500 companies are here. Everybody is, very gracious and was gracious to us. And China's a thriving place, and it was really an exciting place to be. And we traveled all over the country, got to learn, the language very well, the history, the culture, the geography of China. But of course, the Air Force was calling. I had to go back and fly jets, and I did. But what happened was because of that 2 years I spent in China and the fact that I spoke Chinese, I ended up getting staff jobs that had, China policy related flavor. So I worked in the Office of Secretary of Defense, and I helped negotiate the first archive agreement between the U.S. military and the People's Liberation Army for access to the Chinese archives to look for the missing from the Korean War. And then, towards, the end of my B-2 career, when I'd basically done just about every job you could as a B-2 pilot, the Air Force decided along the way that I was going back to China. And so they put me in a series of assignments that ultimately culminated with me becoming the senior defense official in Beijing and the defense attaché. So I was operational almost my entire career. And then towards the latter end was, for a very short time, a member of the intelligence community. Prior to that, I was the J5 China desk officer for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, first Chairman Dempsey and then Chairman Dunford. And one of the things that we were working on there in 2014 was the islands in the South China Sea. Prior to getting to the Pentagon, I had been a senior military fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, and that really brought me into contact with a lot of financial leaders, industry leaders, and I had a fateful lunch in the fall of 2013 with one of the gentlemen that had a lot of money invested in China, and the discussion revolved around the future of China's economy, and my opinion was they were going to stagnate and decline, kind of like Japan had done in the 80s. And his opinion was, no, they're going to continue to grow and they're going to become the most powerful economy and most powerful country in the world. I agreed. We agreed to disagree, and I went from there on to the Pentagon. Well, so in the course of working on, what do we do about these islands in the South China Sea that President Obama was concerned about and really pressuring General Dempsey to do something about. What Chairman Dempsey believed is there's no real good option here. Well, about the time, the fall of 2014, so basically a year after that lunch I had in New York City with that investor, he sends me a briefing, a presentation that had been prepared by one of the top 5 audit agencies. And it sat in my inbox for about a week. And then I opened it up, and then my life basically changed. So up until that point, as a B-2 guy, I felt like I understood warfare. I'd trained for it my entire adult life. I'd studied, I'd had several years of professional military education. I knew what Clausewitz said. I knew what Jomini said. I knew what Julio Duhay said. I had a in my mind, very good grasp about what warfare was, and more importantly, from a B-2 perspective, how to conduct it in a way that really enabled the United States to get a political outcome in the case where a nation, was defying its will. My job was to take that airplane, 6,000 miles away and put JDAMs where the government wanted them in order to achieve that outcome. Well, what I saw when I opened up that briefing and took a step back and really kind of contemplated was that here was a different type of warfare. Here was a way to achieve a political effect without actually using a JDAM. One good example of this, one of the key things that we did as B-2 pilots were to take out the telecommunication nodes of a country during the opening stages of a conflict. That's one way to affect telecommunications, but there's a whole host of other methods, many that you're aware of. But things that I was not aware of was the ability that China had achieved to basically change the underlying technology, the standards, influence the companies that were building the networks, actually buy the networks. I mean, here was a whole array of tactics, techniques, and procedures for achieving the same outcomes that I had, been trained to achieve on the battlefield. And as I looked at that, we basically created a presentation that we started to take around to all the senior 4-stars in the military. And I got 2 reactions from those briefings. One was, this is really bad. The other one was, it's really not my job. My job is to, fight tonight. It's not to worry about, are our companies being influenced to do things that are counter to our national interests. And so we, as we briefed out the senior leadership in the military, the vice chairman at the time asked me to take a look at it. And so we went and we talked to Commerce and Treasury and State Department, FBI and DOJ, and everybody that we thought would have a role in countering this behavior that we were looking at from the Pentagon. And the answer we got back, no, there's nobody really doing anything about this. So we created an office back in 2015 called the Office of Commercial and Economic Analysis. Most people don't know about the office. It's actually in the Air Force Secretariat under the administrative assistant position. It's one of the offices that was doing threat finance work for the Gulf War, and so we basically created this office to begin to look at the impacts to first the defense industrial base in the United States, and how the loss of tens of thousands of factories and millions of manufacturing workers was impacting the Department of Defense ability to go to war. And one of the things that we realized is DoD can't go to war without China. That's a big problem if China turns out to be your adversary, which is something when you begin to study what the Chinese Communist Party actually believes and thinks and talks about privately, you realize that they see us as an adversary. And so this led to eventually you might going to Beijing to be the defense attaché, and then on to the White House to be the senior director for strategy, where I was the architect for our current national security strategy. Along the way, I've learned a ton more, and I think the most concerning is the ability that China has with regard to the collection of data and the use of data to alter perceptions and to influence behavior. What I didn't realize at the time, obviously we had in the Air Force had studied how do you influence a population using weapons from the air. And it turns out it's very hard. People tend to get mad at the people that are bombing them, not at the government, because they won't enact whatever policy the people that are bombing them is trying to get them to enact. Warden's 5 rings theory really talks about the population being the hardest to influence with air power. But it turns out that Silicon Valley built this incredible engine for influencing people. And when the iPhone came out in 2007, the top 5 in market cap were AT&T, General Electric, Microsoft, ExxonMobil, and Shell. And in 10 years, with the introduction of the iPhone, and in 2007 and in 2009, the building of 4G networks, the combination of that infrastructure and that mobile compute environment really transformed the global economy to where, just 10 years later, 25% of the S&P 500 was represented by Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google. So now you look at what is their business model. What do they do? Well, Silicon Valley has created a business around harvesting data and basically turning around and using that data to influence your consumption decisions. Now, the great thing about that is the Chinese Communist Party thinks about war in a fundamentally different way than we do. So when we think about applying force to achieve a political outcome, what they think about is achieving a political outcome by any means necessary. So rather than to use Clausewitz, war is politics by other means, in the People's Liberation Army's mind, politics is war. In other words, political warfare is the name of the game. And what they discovered was that globalization and the internet really gave them the ability to take political warfare and express it on a global level. And when you think about that, and you think about the ability that Silicon Valley has to mine data and influence decisions, and then you realize that the Chinese couldn't break into that because Android and Apple had essentially dominated the market for smartphones. Huawei couldn't break in; they needed Android. Actually, when they were put on the entity list and didn't have Android, it really their device sales plummeted. But what they were doing is basically building the next evolution of the internet, and that's really 5G. And so what they had in 2017, when I was a defense attaché, you could order food from a restaurant on your phone through WeChat, put your phone away, walk into a restaurant, as you did, a camera would recognize your face and the server would greet you by name and hand you your food. And so basically what they have been building is this world where you can take the city around you, begin to mine the data of that city using artificially intelligence powered cameras and using all the data that's collected via sensors on smartphones and those arrayed around the city, and begin to get a good characterization of what the people are doing in that city, and then to turn around and use that information to influence consumer behavior. But it doesn't end there. It's also social and political behavior. And so we talk about, and I'm sure many of you heard about the social credit score in China. The social credit score is really a comprehensive score on an individual based on their behavior that if it becomes too low, really limits their access to goods and services. You can't get on an airplane. Your kid can't get into school. You can't get a job or can't get a raise, can't get a home loan, can't get insurance. It becomes a way of canceling people out of society. Well, it turns out that doesn't stop at the water's edge where China is concerned, because it actually flows through into the United States. In my book, I talk about Roy Jones, who was a mid-level employee at Marriott Corporation who liked to tweet about Tibet. From his job in the social media department, the Shanghai Tourism Bureau called Marriott Corporation, said, deal with Roy Jones and apologize. So Marriott, 3 days later, fired Roy Jones and apologized. Of course, you're all familiar with Daryl Morey of the NBA and how he was almost fired as well. LeBron James, came to, not the rescue of Daryl Morey or free speech, but actually came out publicly and said, we ought not to say anything bad about China. And the reason he did was because of the enormous backlash within China promulgated by the Chinese Communist Party towards NBA apparel and NBA games. So it was a financial hit to the NBA. And so really what you find is this ability to extend the power of the Chinese Communist Party exists because of these financial relationships. One of the biggest ones recently was at the Shanghai Expo. A young lady got up on top of a Tesla and started screaming about the brakes in Tesla. That protest Remember, this is a regime that killed 10,000 people in Tiananmen Square for protesting. That protest was picked up on national TV, spread all over social media. And today, I think Tesla has a 27% drop in market share. Now, Elon Musk and his shares at Tesla is highly influenced by their sales in China. Elon Musk also has another company, SpaceX, that has a constellation, Starlink. So you can begin to see the ties and links between what China can do to put pressure on Tesla, to therefore put pressure on SpaceX, to put pressure on potentially not transmitting Starlink into the mainland China. So it's a three-dimensional chess game that the Chinese Communist Party plays. It's very, very sophisticated. It's actually quite simple, though, and it's using relationships and financial influence and this global information domain to really shape the world in their favor. And it's never been more foundational to our existence than in 2020. So many of you may remember a report that came out in early 2020 about the coronavirus, saying that over 2 million Americans were predicted to die. It turns out that report comes out of the Imperial College of London. It also turns out that in 2015, Xi Jinping made a trip to the Imperial College of London and started giving them millions of dollars in research money, some of which went to epidemiology studies. So it's also interesting to note that all the subsequent studies out of the Imperial College of London have been biased in the same direction. Now, that report was picked up by social media influencers, and it was tweeted, and it was talked about, and was written about. And of course, that was picked up then by legacy media, again retweeted. At the same time, you may remember that these videos of people just collapsing in the street were all over the internet. By the way, you know, it's none of these YouTube or anything else is available in China. And when there was a lockdown on the 23rd of January in Wuhan, the WHO and the CDC said this is unprecedented in terms of dealing with the pandemic. But only like a week or 10 days later did the WHO come out and say, wow, China had stopped the coronavirus in its tracks. And you know, then you began to see the pattern of repeating that policy throughout the free world. When just 70 miles off the coast of China, Taiwan, who had sent researchers to Wuhan in December, they had come back, told the CDC that there was a problem. They actually sent a letter to the WHO warning them about the threat of a pandemic. The WHO ignored them. They instituted in the 1st of January, voluntary quarantine, voluntary hand washing, masks, and social distances. In fact, I was there in January of 2020 to attend the political rallies for the election and to monitor the election, where tens of thousands of people gathered in the streets of Taipei to listen to the speeches that were given. Very few of which were wearing masks. And so here you had a democracy dealing with the coronavirus fundamentally differently than the rest of the democracies in the world. And why did they get it right when it looks to be, with the devastation in our economy and the loss of small businesses, that we got it wrong? Well, it turns out that the Taiwanese were very focused on disinformation coming out of China, and they had created not only an effort within the government to answer fake news within 24 hours, but they also had in non-governmental organizations that were focused on fact checking. They were very aware of the propaganda coming out of the Chinese Communist Party. But yet the World Health Organization, our own CDC didn't listen to Taiwan. Why is that? And I think the answer that I came to the conclusion is that the Chinese Communist Party has done a very, very good job of influencing not only our own medical institutions within the West, our international medical institutions, the entire pharmaceutical industry. By the way, almost all of our pharmaceutical precursors are made in China. One of the things I learned about DC is that industry has an enormous sway on policy as it occurs in DC. And that's the same for the medical industry. One of the things that you notice as this pandemic has kind of fully materialized is enormous profits being made by the pharmaceutical companies. So, I think it's safe to say that we created a world, and that was about openness. It was about the free expression of innovation, technology, talent, and capital across borders. And the Chinese Communist Party essentially saw an opportunity to change the course of history in terms of, what's a better system? Is an authoritarian government system better, or is a democratic republic better? I think prior to the end of the Cold War, prior to the fall of the Berlin Wall, people would generally agree that a democratic system is much better. But now you have all over the world, to include very senior people and many of the elites in the United States, believing that authoritarian systems are much better. They're less chaotic. They get policy through much faster. They can implement a lockdown and contact tracing without any concern over civil liberties, and that this is a much better system. This is the threat we face today, and it's not a threat where I realized that my time in uniform really was not going to serve democracy anymore, because we weren't going to get invaded by Marines coming out of China. What was happening was our fundamental social cohesion, our political system, our economic system, our financial system, our university system was under attack. And it was under attack in a way that, quite frankly, leveraged what we believe to be the strengths of democracy, which is openness. Because when you bring in a regime that embraces those concepts, but embraces them in a way that they become the avenues for attack, then you've opened yourself up to a very dangerous foe. Now, the national security strategy that came out in December of 2017 was very simple in its orientation. Protect the institutions of our society, and do that by decoupling from China. Don't allow them to have, hundreds of thousands of students in our universities, and don't allow them to pay our professors and scientists, millions of dollars to do research for China. Don't allow them to, fundamentally undermine the free trade system through subsidies. Don't allow them to steal our technology out of our laboratories. Don't allow them to influence our corporations to do things that are counter to our own society. And do that by cutting them off. And rather than allowing the innovation, technology, talent, and capital flow into China, redirect those bounties of a free society into our own citizens. Invest in infrastructure, in manufacturing, and STEM education, and science and technology. Many of the leaders of cryptology in the United States were educated on federal grants through a program called Education for National Security during the Cold War. And during the Cold War, if you remember, we focused on building our economy, building our technology, building our society, strengthening economic opportunity, while we were working on our own equality under the law. And what's happened is we've abandoned those things. We've abandoned, actually developing our own society, and we've essentially embraced this war footing that really also aids what the Chinese want. So one of the things that you find out is when you spend $40 to $60 billion a year in Afghanistan, that $40 to $60 billion that could be educating 200,000 American kids a year through 4-year STEM degree programs. You train in 5 years, you train 1 million new scientists and engineers. Instead, it ends up in Afghanistan and you don't get a good return on it because the Chinese are moving back in there anyway. So protect, rebuild through investment, and then the last leg of the strategy was really to inspire other democracies like we had been doing. You know, the reason people find America so attractive is because of the equality under the law and economic opportunity. What had happened by bringing China into this global system is that we had abandoned economic opportunity for the American people. So now America has equality under the law. We don't have an economic opportunity. In China, you don't have equality under the law, but you do have economic opportunity. In other words, you can have access to capital. I started a company to focus on hardened infrastructure for the United States when I left the government. I could go to China and get $100 million in capital to build my technology, but it's in the United States, it's very hard to even get 10 million capital. So it is a challenge for us. It's something that, you know, even today I find people that don't understand the fundamental difference in the way of war between the way we think about it and the way they think about it. And we don't even understand that we're losing. So with that, I think I'd like to open it up to questions, and I'd love to hear what people have.
Well, I'll start with a question. So for years, China has been stealing our intellectual property, and I think back, you know, over the years, Huawei and how they've gone and infiltrated, you know, across the globe, right, and set up their infrastructure, and, you know, a lot of it based on U.S. technology to some extent. So how would you address that, and what steps could we take to?
Well, first of all, it's not just Huawei. One of the things that's happened is, you know, if you're going to make a device today, there was some, you know, in the early days of wireless, there were some countries that kind of came up with their own standard. And that standard, you know, really didn't go anywhere. So for instance, Japan had a different standard than everybody else. And so you had to have a phone that was made for Japan in order for it to work. Now we've created these global standards where, you know, you want a device to work everywhere you go. Well, it turns out that we used to run those standards, and we used to have the majority of the patented technology for telecommunications. Not anymore. The Chinese run the standard making bodies. They own a lot of the patents for the underlying technology. And so it's not just Huawei, it's all the telecommunications companies, it's all the computing companies. They're all creating this global supply chain. And the point of what the Chinese are doing are assuring that global supply chain supports their effort to become the Saudi Arabia of data. What they have said is they have a capacity to collect data on everybody, you, me, their citizens. There's no restrictions on their ability to collect data, and therefore they can run that and basically become the best country in the world in artificial intelligence. And that is their goal. Their goal is basically to become the Saudi Arabia of data, to have all that artificial intelligence, to then begin to influence at the individual level the type of behavior that the Chinese Communist Party wants to instill. And so it's not just Huawei, it's how we look at telecommunications infrastructure and computing infrastructure today. It's why I said in the beginning, encryption is so important at preserving a democracy, because it turns out you can have a gun according to the Second Amendment, but today we have a system where you can be incentivized or influenced to do things that are counter to your own interests, and not even know that that's going on. And so in that world, you know, guns quickly loses relevance, as you could be influenced to shoot your neighbor because you're convinced that you know, that your neighbor is your enemy. And that's essentially what we've built in this global internet information environment.
Excellent. Thank you. We have another question, and it is regard to standards. You had mentioned that the Chinese have essentially taken over the standards bodies. What do we as a nation need to do to reinsert ourselves into those bodies and regain control?
Well, so we have to do what we did during the Cold War, and that's what decoupling is really about. It's saying, democracies need to work together to ensure that our technology, talent, capital, and innovation don't make its way into the hands of authoritarians. And so what we did during the Cold War was basically isolate them. We isolate them economically, financially, technologically. Now, people will say, well, that's going to be devastating to the economy because China, is the number 2 economy in the world. Yeah, but prior to me going to China back in 2001, they weren't in the World Trade Organization, and their economy was less than $1 trillion. So it is not the case that we have to stay connected to them. We choose to stay connected to them. Actually, we choose to stay connected to them because companies like Facebook and Google and General Motors and General Electric lobby Washington, D.C. to stay connected to them. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce in the United States is the biggest lobby for the Chinese Communist Party and in staying connected. And that's because all their corporations, their profits rely on money invested in China. And so, we have to bifurcate. Now, you may say, well, Rob Spalding, you don't know what you're talking about, but Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Google, says the same thing. We have to have a completely separate technology basis and global supply chain that really is focused on protecting individual liberties, data security, privacy. These are things that are foundational to a democracy. If we are to remain a democracy, then the ability of individuals to be assured of that they're not being influenced outside of their interests by a foreign government or a tech company within our society, then we're going to have to be much more focused on giving people control over their data.
Okay, I don't see any other questions in the Q&A. If anybody has a question, please put it in there now. And like there's something that just came in. I do, one moment. So there is somebody who's coming in with a question. So anyway, in the meantime, and when you think about their long-term goal, what is their long-term goal? When do you think that China says we've achieved success in this? What is it that they're,
Well, it's very simple. The long-term goal of the Chinese Communist Party is to remain in power. And the nature of a regime like that sees any counter to its narrative as a threat to its power. And so because we're globally interconnected, they want to make sure that the narrative is the narrative that they want portrayed. And so anytime somebody says something like, oh, you're committing genocide, or, oh, you're, basically oppressing the people of Hong Kong, the Chinese Communist Party is going to go into attack mode. When Australia talked about, the influence going on within Australia, the Chinese Communist Party attacked Australia economically. They did so against Korea, during THAAD. So it is something that the Chinese Communist Party uses: economics, finance, geopolitics, all the levers of national power. They just don't use military.
Right, correct. It has the same effect. So we do have 2 other questions that are in right now. So what about the EU or the UK? Are they affected the same way as the US is?
Yes, every democracy has as you go around the world and you study each country, what you see is the Chinese Communist Party influencing the commercial sector, and the commercial sector influencing political policies. It is universal. And it's a playbook that's, it combines, market access to China. So these companies want access to 1.4 billion Chinese, and they tell the stock market that, their price, their price is justified by the sales going up in China. And the other is by, money that comes out of China. So there's hedge funds in the United States like Bridgewater that have People's Bank of China money in their fund. So they're motivated by the fees they earn and by market access into China. And it's a very, very easy lever for the Chinese Communist Party to pull.
Okay, we do have other questions coming in now. So US tariffs have moved some supply away from China, but toward other countries without moving it toward the US manufacturing base. How do we bring it home?
Well, that's very easy. The reason China's economy grew from less than $1 trillion to over 14 now was we took off the most favored nation vote in the Congress that happened every year to determine whether or not China was a market economy or it was a human rights violator. When we helped them come into the World Trade Organization, all that went away. Tariffs were wiped out. And so, it made it very easy for them to subsidize away manufacturing from the United States. I think there's a two-pronged effort here. One is to increase tariffs and to make them permanent on China. Two is to actually use the purchasing power of the U.S. government and authorities like the Defense Production Act and Title III to ensure that manufacturing is reshored. We cannot be dependent on China for manufacturing. That's just, it is basically a way that they have us by the throat.
Okay. And then kind of follow on to that, would the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement have been valuable, and can it be valuable in the future?
Well, not in this current form, because what happens is the Chinese use those other nations as transshipment regions for products. So they'll send stuff through Vietnam, have it stamped made in Vietnam when it's actually made in China to get out from under tariffs. And so we have to have much better control mechanisms in terms of trade and finance and technological sharing, much more like what we had during the Cold War if we want to really be effective. Otherwise, the Chinese are very good at undermining the rules as they are. They're buying companies in Mexico. They're buying companies in Canada. They're buying warehouses in Mexico and Canada. You can ship stuff to a warehouse in Canada and then ship it into the United States. And if it's less than $800, there's no tariff charge on it. So they find all kinds of loopholes. They recharacterize goods. Of course, there's fentanyl mixed in with all of this. So I mean, it's a comprehensive strategy.
Okay, and then have another question, someone in the chat here. So CCP is deep in Africa and other regions now. How will a long-term position work for the U.S. when we have missed the boat to date regarding getting allies to support our goals?
Well, look, I think the problem that China sees in emerging market economies is they need help growing economically. Now, part of my comment about inspiring other democracies, when America is doing well, it can work together with allies to help emerging market economies grow. I think one of the things that I've learned from the Chinese Communist Party is they take a comprehensive look at an emerging market economy and say, not like us, where we have USAID put a water project here or a power project there. They actually look at, what are the resources of the country? How do we expose those to the Chinese market? And then how do we use that as a means for developing, an industrial economy, and then finally an informational economy? That's one of the things that we saw. So, for example, say you need cobalt out of the Democratic Republic of Congo, so you build a mine, and then you need the port. So you got to have the rail to get to the port, and you got to have the power and the fiber and the telecommunications and water system, then highway system, and then what happens next is since you have all the skeletal system of an industrial economy, China brings in low value added manufacturing. And that was the largest investment that they were making, I think by far, in Africa back in 2017 when we looked at it. And so they were building these cities and building manufacturing for Chinese people that were moving over there. And then because they had these very cheap, inexpensive smartphones, they could sell them to the people there. And pretty soon you could turn over to the African leadership a society that allowed the leadership to basically implement an IT-based authoritarian system, within a couple of generations. So it's a strategy they have that works very well. And it's something that we did as well. We did it during the aftermath of World War II. It was called the Marshall Plan. And the Marshall Plan was very effective. It was very effective what we did in Japan. It was very effective what we did in Korea. If you think about it, we don't understand that these countries need economic prosperity more than they need military assistance. So what the United States has tended to do since the end of the Cold War is use military assistance as a means of currying favor with countries. Now, this does not work in countries like India, where they need economic development. And so we go into India and we say, hey, be a part of the Quad, work with us militarily. Well, India needs economic development. And if we were to think differently about that problem, say, hey, we're not just going to be a military partner, we're going to take all that investment and time and resources that we're pouring into China, and we're going to move it over to India. And we're going to help your economy grow, because if your economy is growing strong and your prosperity is good, then you're a stable democracy and you can be a good partner, a good security partner. So it's thinking differently about how we do geopolitics and national security policy. It's not about building more F-35s and aircraft carriers. It's really about how we invest in our own people, and then how we take that economic prosperity and share it with our democratic allies in ways that promote our comprehensive security.
Okay, so another question. Does the American political system have the correct structure to initiate and sustain a successful decoupling with China, given that the US presidential election cycles are only 4-year terms compared to the 4-life presidency in China? Would any self-interested US president bet his career on the decoupling effort?
Well, I think so. One of the things that you have, there's a good book by Catherine Gale called The Politics Industry. Highly recommend you read it. We have created this duopoly in the United States where the political parties really work for the parties themselves. They don't actually work for the citizens they represent, and that's a problem with the way that we've allowed the system to develop. And they have some recommended changes, some of which that were recently adopted in the last elections in November by the state of Alaska. Other states are looking into it. It's really about decreasing the power of the party to basically choose their own candidates and really cut the American people out of that decision-making process. And so I highly recommend you read that. But the other thing that I think is, I agree with, there's far too much money, dark money, in our political system, and that enables this corporate influence that I'm talking about. And so it's kind of interesting where you have a recognition within Congress that the tech companies have too much power to censor speech, but they're unwilling to actually implement policy against them. Why is that? Well, it's because the tech companies themselves are paying, they're giving them donations for their campaign. So it's a system that's allowed, for corruption to step in. And I agree, we need to clean it up. But this is just a recent feature of our political system. It ebbs and flows. We have corruption in our system, and it has to be rooted out. I think we're back there again. The challenge we have here is not only do we have corruption in our own system, we've actually invited in the Chinese to help accelerate that corruption with their money, because a lot of these things that they want done actually contribute to the divisiveness in the United States. If we're divided, then it's much easier for them to get the policies they want out of us.
Okay, here's a question that may have a long answer, but we'll see. Could you sketch a path to victory for China regarding Taiwan according to the win without fighting strategy? How does the U.S. prevent it?
Yes, I think you can, but I think the problem is, and I saw this last January, is that the Taiwanese have become quite tuned into this. So what's going to happen, I believe, is that after the Olympics next year, the clock starts ticking for Taiwan to actually, in this case, it's going to be a military invasion. I believe it's coming in the next 5 years. I think our role is going to be either resupply or evacuation. We're not going to fight China. They've got nukes. We've got nukes. But I do believe, I don't believe that China is a military threat to the United States. I do believe they're going to invade Taiwan. I think it's because Xi Jinping wants to have that happen on his watch. I think he sees that as his legacy. And I think, quite frankly, they have the power to do it anytime they want. The reason that they're restrained is not because of the U.S. military. The reason they're restrained is once they do it, they know that this relationship with the West, where they can have all the innovation, technology, talent, and capital they want, where corporate America can basically do their bidding, and DC will look the other way. Once they invade Taiwan, and the world sees that's going to go away, and so that's why they're restrained right now.
Okay, another question. China is currently benefiting from COVID supply and vaccines for the world. Will they likely be seen in a positive light for this long term, or is it possible at this late stage to hold them responsible for the global damage?
I think there's a rising awareness that the Chinese Communist Party are culpable in the spread of the coronavirus. I think more and more information will come out about their role in spreading disinformation and creating fear that led to the lockdowns and economic devastation. They admit themselves and to themselves that they saw an advantage in the coronavirus. In fact, Xi Jinping there was a speech published just the other day of Xi Jinping talking about the rise of China and the fall of everybody else, because coronavirus really gives them an advantage, and they're going to take advantage of it. And so I do think that this is becoming more and more understood around the world. And I think just like Taiwan kind of inoculated itself against information warfare, I think we need to understand that it's not F-35s and tanks and ships and bombs that are going to save us. It's really understanding the facts on the ground and really being able to talk and dissent amongst ourselves in ways that are in ways that allow us to really come to the right answer. What we've had in the last few years is this tendency to just shut people up and not allow them to kind of discuss and argue and actually debate. And in fact, when we do debate logically, because we are a rule of law society, then we typically get to the right answer. And the right answer is really that our information system is being subtly, but very effectively influenced to curb our natural reaction to this influence.
Okay. I have a few more questions. Some third world countries seem to realize that interacting with China is not all positive. Can we encourage this and replace China in these roles?
Yes, I think though it really comes, that inspiration really comes from first being very effective at home at providing economic opportunity. So, one of the things that you see that goes hand in hand with the decline of our industrial base is those factories that we lost and those jobs that we lost created problems for social cohesion in those communities, and those communities have not recovered. And so until we have, I believe, a manufacturing base is crucial to a thriving economy and a prosperous society, I think we're going to continue to have problems, really inspiring the rest of the world. We can't bully people into liking America. We actually have, in many ways, Americans are our best ambassadors, because if things are good at home, if we're growing our economy, if our science and technology is tops, if our universities are tops, then countries are going to look to us. Citizens of countries are going to look to us for that inspiration. And so I think it starts at home, but then, as our prosperity begins to grow, then we share that, but we share it in a very targeted, effective, strategic way. Look for those countries that, want to be connected economically, financially, politically, socially with the United States, and then give them a comprehensive strategy to help themselves rise out of poverty and into more of a developing world or developed world.
Okay, 2 more questions for you. First is, have the key China people in the current administration shown an openness to your views?
They haven't completely thrown them out. I think everybody's noticed that there's been a lot of continuation of Trump policies. I don't know what the Biden administration's China policies are yet. They haven't really been very forthcoming on that. My hope is that there's many people that's in the government that aren't political appointees that now understand the challenge we face and do their part to help educate the political appointees and really move the discussion. I do think that things have changed since 2016 quite significantly on both sides of the aisle. So there's a recognition. But the problem is, what do we do about it? And in this case, I think, the Trump administration was good at the decoupling part. They were not good at the investment in our society part. I think the Biden administration could do a lot more, rather than targeting money, just as handouts, focusing on infrastructure, manufacturing, science and technology, and STEM education as a means of propelling our economy. I think we'd be much better off.
Okay, and we're down to 2 minutes left. And so this question is, since we spend a lot of time with our K-12 students, what experiences do you recommend for cybersecurity teachers to share with 9th through 12th graders?
Well, cybersecurity is much more than just, hackers. It's really about social engineering. It's about taking advantage of your tendencies as a human and making children more aware of their surroundings and to understand that, they are a target and they will continue to be a target. And the way they think about how they interact with things that collect data or have data or share data about them and with them, I think it makes them better. Most of the things that I saw in terms of companies being targeted, it was through social engineering on somebody by, convincing them to click on something or do something that they knew they probably shouldn't do, but that's why the Chinese Communist Party is so good. It's really about changing, behavior in ways that allow for these kinds of things.
So it's interesting. I have one last question that just came in while you were saying that, so maybe this is relevant to that. You have a lot of experience with China in language and culture. How do you see change that was tried by students in June 1989 began and possibly slowly happening within China will allow better choices for Chinese people and putting China in a better position in the world? Is it possible in 20 to 30 years?
So, what the Chinese Communist Party has basically patterned itself after is Silicon Valley. And Silicon Valley controls our perceptions and behavior patterns right now through their platforms. And I think China does that very, very well. And the government, the Chinese Communist Party controls them all. So I think it's going to be very, very difficult in China now, because when you talk to your standard Chinese national, their opinions are basically influenced by what, the Chinese Communist Party allows to be on their platforms. And so in many ways, it's hard to break out of that. It's hard to unprogram yourself. Li Yuan, who wrote an article in the New York Times about, social media, social influence or influence in the age of Instagram, or Chinese influence in the age of Instagram, something of that nature was the title of the article, really talks about how hard it was for herself to be deprogrammed coming out of China because of the propaganda, because of the constant education from kindergarten to university. So it is a pervasive part of their society. And now it's built into the way they do business, just like it is for us with Facebook, Amazon, and Google. So this is the open data, global internet system is a perfect environment for authoritarianism. I think in order for them to actually, the Chinese people actually break out of that, somehow they're going to have some tools that actually allow them to have different views than what they currently do.
Well, that wraps up everything for us. If you have any closing comments, then we can go to our closing.
I really appreciated the time and look forward to maybe talking again. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your thoughts on this program today. And to all of our participants, thank you for joining us today. This program has been recorded and will be available on our website in days to come. We appreciate your participation and your continued support of our foundation's mission. Is members like you who make it possible for us to schedule events like this. If you liked our program today and are not currently a member, please join and become a member as noted on the slide. As I mentioned in the beginning of our program, wait a minute. Sorry, I apologize. It went away for me. I'm sorry. As I mentioned at the beginning of our program, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization and depend on the support of our members and donors for education and membership programs. Thank you.